better. And this concept has been kind of having such process that having had this AI-related research for a long time, but then when I got this cancer, so I kind of realized that either I kind of give up and start to wait for the death, or then I do something meaningful. And then I was thinking about positive uses of AI for a year or two. And then one day in January 2014, I got this idea that, oh, world peace would be actually quite a bold thing to have. It's of course impossible, but anyway, let's think about it. And that was like opening whatever kind of new door or something. So things started to flow in my mind. I got kind of ideas started to pour in, and I realized that there are just huge number of different applications of artificial intelligence, natural language processing, that could help in these things. And then I asked a couple of or three no-nonsense colleagues that what do you think, because this could be more like a laughable idea rather than something serious, and they said that go ahead. So that's convinced that I can start to go further. And then Helsingin Sanomat reporter, some weeks later, I met him and I presented one-page abstract about this idea, and he was kind of looking at what is this crazy man here. But then he had used Google, which is Google is actually also to be thanked. So he was convinced that this is someone to be taken seriously, and that's why the 6-page article in Helsingin Sanomat was also a very central part of this process. And that led into the situation that thousands of people became interested, and this kind of social process took place. So that I needed, because of my semi-blindness, I'm quite slow in writing. I can send some social media messages and so on, and even write articles, but it's much faster if I can take the device and start to say that in this chapter we are discussing about, and so on. And so it went to the cloud and came back as written English. And then I had a student of theoretical philosophy who helped me to kind of correct the problems there, so that if there's some name like Wittgenstein, so then it would be detected without as something very strange, and that's why there was still some work. I would say that Google's speech recognition works quite a bit better than this German system, but that's not as easily available, this Google system, to kind of author a book. And then what happened is that there were the later stages of the book, and then Gaudeamus publishing house started to kind of spread it, and already the first week it was sold out, and apparently was the kind of fastest book to be sold by that publisher. And so it convinced me again that one should continue and take this seriously with this communal support. And that's why you see the languages which are kind of either under work or then being kind of progressed in meetings, and how to take care of the idea, that to spread the idea elsewhere. And one of the motivations also to take this work further is that I got a chance to discuss with Ahtisaari and CMI, his organization, and there was a conference a little bit more than a year ago where I had a chance to visit this for presidents of Africa actually, and some other visitors, international visitors in the network of Ahtisaaris, and the feedback was really enthusiastic. So the people were kind of saying that this is something they have never seen before, and so on. So it's mostly, of course, just a concept. It's not the kind of collection of systems, and we can start to discuss this here and now a little bit further. But basic idea is such that then there would be kind of, this would promote collaboration, because this overall thing is, from the point of view of scientific practice, it belongs, or it kind of touches upon dozens of, or let's say 15, 20 different disciplines of science. And then there's this societal aspect, citizen aspect, research related, and then the development, practical development. And this is the scale, as you can see then here. So it's such large scale that one academic project would be just one out of 1,000 part of the building the whole thing. But one has to start from somewhere, and luckily the situation is such that, of course, one doesn't need to start from scratch, because some of the things are such that it may be that you have already something which just would require a little bit of changing it, and it would be already a solution for some of the parts described in this overall idea. And of course this is not a closed idea, so of course it's meant to be open in various ways, open science, open data, and open methodology, in the sense that how to bring things together. But as a basic concept, the idea is to bring forward AI different methods in order to promote peaceful situations in the world. And this, of course, requires also competence in the areas which are related to these areas, including psychology and history and etc., 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 as mentioned. Many areas in humanities and social sciences, linguistics and sociolinguistic, cognitive linguistics, cognitive science, etc., etc. And then, in order to take it to the world, it would be needed to be a process in which citizens would be there and decision makers. And one of the reasons why I find it optimistic, even though it's close to impossible, but anyway, why it's good to be in Finland, is that if it's a Google or some Russian or Chinese organization or company, so then it would be very difficult for anyone in those other places to trust that this is something that they could take seriously, or they would dare to kind of give it to their citizens and so on. So if something that could be started from somewhere in the world, so I think Nordic countries are good in this. Actually, discussing having the discussions of yesterday in mind, I think also some place in Africa would be quite interesting from this point of view, because I think the trust is important in these matters, in this development, but of course in the things in themselves, and then something which is the fears or concerns that people have regarding that if someone is offering something that needs to come from a place that doesn't threaten the kind of one who is making the decisions. And the reason why people would feel threatened or concerns is that in order to implement the basic idea, the idea is to give kind of more or less all the data to these machines. So just in order to, for example, promote mutual understanding at the linguistic communicational level, so it only can happen at the high level if the system would have all the information. But we can discuss that in more detail, but the basic idea is anyway that it would be owned personally, so that it's not given to some company or organization, but it would be kind of locally stored, and then we would give the permission for it to be used kind of for kind of particular purposes, actually quite a bit in the way how the EU kind of Commission has been now kind of starting to regulate these things. So there's a clean link there. But for which purposes this data and these methods would be developed is natural language processing, in the sense that the communication would be improved. And there I mentioned this meaning negotiation, which we will discuss more in detail. But if I say it already shortly, so the basic idea is, and it challenges also our work and the kind of even the philosophical basis of the work and scientific basis, is that the idea there, and of course you can challenge it, but I'm quite convinced now after some decades of work related to this, is that no word that we use and we are kind of having our kind of that we have having in front of us is understood strictly as the same way as someone else. So if I say something, so there is always this situation that it's at least to some small degree this word is understood differently. But if we have a similar background, cultural background, some kind of schooling, and the society around us is similar, so in most of the cases these meanings and the interpretations are close enough so that it doesn't harm the communication. But if, for example, we have something like that, what is fair, so the word fair is something that is quite clear that the word fair is not only something that is kind of having a different opinion, but even the basic, in quote, definition of the word is different. And there is this, I would say, old personal finding that definitions are quite limited in their power. So even if you try to specify something and try to formalize the meaning by giving a definition for a word, so it's a kind of problematic because you can't really trust that the words that you use in the definition, they are being understood the same way. So it's a kind of circular problem, and then the words that we use are actually such that they are grounded in our experience in the world. And the experience is personal, so by definition our understanding of the contents and the meanings of the words varies. And that's why this kind of old formalization of the meanings of the words is actually futile to some extent. It works to some degree, and that's why it hasn't been kind of replaced. And also one problem is that the kind of statistics and the mathematics and the data needed to kind of approach something which would come closer to reality of what is the kind of real situation is such that we need kind of huge computational resources and data resources to address this thing. But that's the first area. Second area is that in order to really to be peaceful, it's understanding each other is not enough. We need to find ways to deal with situations when we start to be angry or fearful and so on. And the basic idea is that these boxes would be with us as kind of wise systems that would be personal agents that would say that, oh, Timo, now why you feel angry, but actually you are angry because 50 years ago you experienced something like this, and that's why this is only a projection of your kind of poor past, and then you can think about this situation differently. So that means that person didn't mean anything bad when he or she said something like this, and that's the one of the ideas that when we have millions and then billions of such interventions, so that also calms down these kind of situations in the world. And one example is actually just very recent and highly relevant, is that the North Korean leader and US president, they are just now kind of discussing about whether they would meet, and now Trump said that they won't meet. And I have been studying these discussions quite carefully and for some weeks, because these are quite good examples of these phenomena. And what happened there, so this is always, of course, a story, and there are kind of many dimensions and many details, but how it seems to be that USA and South Korea suggested that they could meet, and then North Korea said that yes, that's fine, or kind of they had this discussion. And quite immediately, I think it was 2-3 days later, South Korea and USA announced that they will have these practices in with their forces, armed forces. And then North Korea sent angry messages that didn't actually. It seems that they approved kind of in some sense, but anyway they kind of presented these kind of negative messages, and then the tone of talks in the US went down, and there was this kind of lowering enthusiasm about these things. And now we are in the situation where North Korea says that, oh, we could continue the discussions, and now Trump can't say anymore that we meet when he has just said that we won't meet, and losing the face and all these things are now there. But in that very moment, when those leaders decided that they will organize those practices with the armed forces, so that was one of the key failures there, because if they would have kind of wanted to really make real progress, the message, the kind of message that they would have needed to organize would have been that actually we postpone these kind of practices and we will have the meeting first and so on. So by postponing those practices by a month or two, the situation could be quite different. But that's like Johan Galtung said, or I read his article some time ago, that he pointed out that we would need to understand our own position, both the positive and negative aspects of our acting and emotions and so on, and the same things for the opponent, and then take a meta-level kind of view on these matters, so that the dynamics of the system would need to be considered not only from one's own point of view, but also from the other's point of view, and accepting one's own kind of failures and negative or kind of problematic doings. So the kind of that's something, and the basic idea is here that in the long terms our thinking could be kind of improved by having systems that are active epistemologically and even emotionally in these complex systems, and could give wise advice not only to leaders but for anyone in the world, because we are in many cases we are either democratic kind of societies, or in those places which are not democratic, they need to take into account the thoughts of the citizens in practice if there is a very strong opposition. So then the leaders need to kind of take care of that, because it won't last forever. And that's something which refers to the third area, that in order to make the world to kind of really stay in reasonable conditions, so the fairness needs to be taken into account, and fairness here referring to societies, economies, democratic processes, decision-making processes, and so on. So that's the kind of, even if our communication and our emotions are kind of improved somehow, so then we need to take into account that we need to take care of those who are having diseases or who are poor and so on. Unless, if that's not taken care of, so then the problems arise, and the time dynamics are then there. Interesting. I start here telling something about my background. Some of you know some of this, but maybe it's anyway interesting to know also something about the line of reasoning and why some things have emerged. Is that in the 1980s there was a project called Kielikone, language machine, funded by Sitra Foundation, and it was quite substantial funding that they provided at that time. So there was really a chance to to try to do something with good resources, and it was really a test of traditional logic applied in natural language processing. So everything was done really kind of carefully, and I would say that this Arno Lehtola especially was a really kind of a serious researcher, in the sense that he was able to create all the necessary formalizations and formalisms. So we used Lisp language, and then he implemented formalism for each level of abstraction, in the sense that it wasn't just Lisp programming, but we had a formalism for morphology, we had a formalism for syntax. I was mostly in semantics, and then I had thoughts about how to implement and build rules on those things. And then I presented requests that I would now need formalism through which I can represent this and that. And then he programmed it, and we had a kind of a whole range from forms of words until all the way to the database queries. And there was this universal database query, which was again transformed into SQL. So it was a really kind of full-blown formalistic kind of approach to this. And then the problem was that this symbol manipulation approach failed. So it was one of those many projects which didn't bring all the things that we would have liked to have. And the first thing was that the quantity was a problem. So in order to have everything, to have this system to work, would have needed much more than hundreds of rules. So tens or hundreds of thousands of rules would have been needed, and that's to have a reasonable coverage for some domain. And then this was kind of pointing towards the statistical machine learning, and in order to create those rules. But the other insight that I got there was that it's also a problem related to quality, so that it was already this first insight into the direction that rules are not enough to formalize and to understand how meaning of words should be kind of modeled. And so this mapping between the world, so to say philosophically ontology, where I have to say that the ontology being used in computer science by some people, like my friend and colleague Eero Hyvänen, is doing work in that area, but ontologies are there, they are epistemologies, because they are the linguistic structures. So that's not kind of linguistic structures of meaning, of course, but meaning of, let's say, a computer or something. This the word computer is not this thing here, or the weather is not the word weather, but it's the thing, the kind of complex phenomenon there, etc. So that's why the kind of that has been even for the history of philosophy, it has been a quite substantial problem. So then in information retrieval, so most of you know this, that there is this history of information retrieval and using the vector-based models to kind of have a different mathematical framework for formalizing meanings of expressions, and that's a relevant background. And then I've been interested in fuzzy sets, not fuzzy reasoning, but just the sets, because there's this problem that if you have a meaning of something to be something that this statement or propositional form is something which is either true or not true or false, so then you have the problem that you have to choose that if you have some person, are you tall or not? And then that's not a meaningful question. So we humans don't use language and don't assess the world in such a way. And one way to formalize it somehow mathematically is to consider that the representation of truth or belonging to a set is something which is not crisp or not only two options. And that's something that's kind of in background. And then personally I had a chance to start work then with Timo Honkela's group, and that's why I have been in many publications where the self-organizing map as a model has been kind of applied. But that's, of course, it's a more like coincidence of history that I happened to be there and learn this model and implement it myself also to learn understanding of it. But of course, it's only one method in the sense that there are many alternatives or two. So, but it has been convenient for me to kind of do some of the things like considering how the meanings and relations between the meanings of words could be emergent, which we will discuss further. And just to show that this has been kind of a problem or interesting topic personally is that in 1993 in a conference I presented this very kind of let's say short or this kind of very schematic model, but pointing out that in order to model meaning in an appropriate way, we need to have the person who is involved, we need to have the phenomenon that is involved, and then we need to have the linguistic expression that is involved. And then I was kind of tackling with this problem how to kind of address this, and this four-page paper is really kind of just a scratch of the surface, but this has been kind of concerning me. Actually, then I have found some things from the 80s, so quite early on I've been problematizing this. One of the little bit more kind of rigorous way to formalize these things is Professor Jardenforce's conceptual spaces. So he's originally a philosopher, but went towards computer science and became a professor of cognitive science. And he has a formalization of these vector spaces being applied in meaning representations. And that's something which I can recommend. His so-called quality dimensions are the basis for the representation of meaning, where his work is mostly related to natural sciences, and I will come soon back to the idea why natural sciences are, of course, important in their areas, but very limited in some other sense. And here's one example where Voronoi tessallations can be used as an example of the subjectivity of meaning and language and conceptual system, so that if you have some phenomenon, external phenomenon that or something that we can perceive, and then we have the internal conceptual and linguistic system, so then this is a kind of demonstration that the same kind of domain of the reality that can be represented with these quality dimensions can be then internally divided in different ways. And this kind of is one example of the reason why it's maybe then difficult to understand each other when our internal conceptual and linguistic structures are different. And for example, this emerges when we are having different backgrounds in our work and in our profession and in our education and experience. And this can be, the basic idea can be applied, for example, building maps between qualitative and quantitative research. So we had one study where there was one company in which there was discussions regarding their kind of strategies with the teams, and this is an analysis of the contents of those things that they had in the conversations. And I don't go here into details, but for example, I just mentioned this project 8, which is the kind of anonymized in that way, and then there are those persons starting from A to something, and these two clusters kind of represent that in this meaning space, these two groups of people had very different views on the kind of contents and strategic views and so on this particular project. And I never read actually those Swedish documents which were analyzed there, and it was interesting that when I made these kind of conclusions based on this kind of abstracted away analysis, so I, for example, said that it seems that in this project 8 there are two camps which are really not agreeing with each other at all, and so on. And then this qualitative researcher said that, oh, this is exactly the way it went in there when she had been reading the documents and making the conclusions. So this is one example of such an analysis. This is just a concrete example of why the use of words is not logically and formalistically that easy, that often is being kind of in reality done, is that I'm practicing golf, and in winter there is a very nice place in Jämijärvi where you can play fully in a forest area, where you can then see a picture where this snow is white only and only if snow is white, if and only if snow is white. This is a kind of formal philosopher's statement related to theoretical kind of semantics, which is kind of foolish thing seen from this purpose or this perspective that the meaning of what is snow or what is white. So mostly when we say that something is white, it's not white in this kind of prototypical sense, and it can be in a context, it could be almost black, and we would still say that this is white snow. And here it's some grade of gray that is in this particular example. So we can use these kind of methods to analyze the let's say conceptual content, and then the kind of category systems that we are being applying. And for example, Academy of Finland gave some, when was it, some about 10 years ago, all the application data that they had received in electronic form for a couple of years, which was their kind of, they had just changed the process, so this was all the data that they had. Again, I didn't read any of the documents. Actually, I didn't want to kind of, I found it to be morally problematic if I start to read colleagues' texts and so on, which were kind of given to the Academy of Finland. So I just put the system to do it, and then we created a data-driven method that also selected the keywords and key phrases there. So based on statistical kind of measures, and then it gave up this kind of structure where one of those conclusions was that the categories that kind of otherwise resembled nicely the organization of the Academy of Finland, but chemistry and physics were quite far away from each other. So in some sense, from this kind of adult science point of view, so to say, there's a school science point of view where we learn that chemistry and physics are just close to each other. But from this kind of serious science point of view, there's biosciences which are heavily in between, and so chemistry is closely related semantically or conceptually, biosciences, medical sciences. And that, of course, doesn't mean that they would have started to reorganize their things because the practical things, decisions are made closer to the actual individual applications. But anyway, so this was quite interesting, emergent result. And now, if we think about these meaning negotiations as one of the areas of the concept of peace machine, is the idea that if for the moment this kind of statistical learning of to model the meaning of words has been based on, for example, matrices which have the words or expressions and the contexts in which those words appear, and then if we have enough knowledge, like also here, very good work in showing how it works well, so that the meaning of cat and dog are closer to each other than the parliament or some other expressions. But then the problem of subjectivity is something that the mathematical matrix needs to be extended to be a tensor, where it is third way of there being subject there, each subject there, so that if we would have real data for this particular purpose, so we would collect the data from each of us separately, not in such a way that we would assume that the words that we use are having the same meaning, but they are actually individually, need to be modeled individually, and that's why we need this kind of tensor, mathematical tensor, and to analyze it. And I have been kind of working with some colleagues on this, but this is still something I would say that I haven't seen really any mathematical kind of model that would really kind of serve the purposes that I would like to see. And I can't claim that I would be so good mathematician that I would have a chance and even the time to do that. So that's one of the areas I would really like to collaborate with some people who kind of have the necessary skills to do that. But this is the kind of early version of the peace machine, in the sense that the idea was that these meaning negotiations would kind of increase the chance to have a better communication and conflict resolution and so on. So this is a kind of early version of that basic idea related to language and communication and concept systems. And I would say that we live very interesting times, as you here also, of course, very well know, that the data that is available and the systems that we can look at are very different from what, for example, linguists have been kind of over the centuries. They have been interested in individual words, and they kind of try to see things through using pen and paper. And now we can go higher and higher levels to higher and higher levels of abstraction and to analyze and understand things in a different way. But the basic idea is such that the meaning negotiation is something which has been kind of working on. It has been a bit difficult to sell, and it's quite interesting that the kind of societal address, or the kind of how people take it, has been much more enthusiastic than scientific for the moment, at least. But then I would say that there's an interesting problem related to formalization, that we kind of, even the computers that we have. So I would say that even the von Neumann architecture is in certain way flawed in order to, for example, do really good natural language processing. So that's the kind of one of the things I'm then coming towards the end. But some words about emergence. So thanks to the fact that I had a chance to work with the self-organizing map, regardless of its formal qualities or lacking some of the lacking formal qualities. So what it helped is was to kind of realize the importance or the potential of the concept of emergence. And so there are a number of different examples of emergence, and Zipf's law is, of course, one of those very commonly known thing about how the kind of statistics of texts and the distributions of words in the texts, or almost any phenomena are having this particular power law shape, and this being kind of learned this project, and then extending this to other contexts than linguistic and symbolic contexts, which I also find like yesterday's examples and discussions regarding that the data more and more often can be something else than just the strings of symbols and words, and having the chance to kind of touch the surroundings in such a way that these are kind of the data is in quotes more natural than the symbolically kind of process things. There we had a kind of chance to see computationally that each millisecond and each millimeter where each body part is kind of located in a time series, and then how the people were kind of naming these different doings, and then the kind of how the what is the mapping between the words and such things with the kind of observed reality. But some words on science and symbolization or creating formalizations. So it seems to me that natural science paradigm has been dominating and so good when we are discussing about natural science phenomena. So of course it has been brought us the chance to fly the moon and build factories and build all the things which we have around. But already when we step into biology and health and so on, so we have some problems there if we only apply natural science ideals. And it's completely disastrous, I would dare to say, if we apply those same things in cultural areas. So our human kind of things. And the basic idea is there that the degree of complexity is very different, and that comes from the thing that the non-living are very simple in comparison with living kind of phenomena, and then cultural phenomena and things related to communication and how complexity arises from our memory so that we can reflect on our past. We have the communication, we have the symbolic system, we have very strong feedback. For example, if you invent something and that's being widely written in newspapers or in media, so that really concretely changes the reality around us at this level of abstraction. So it's not something that we can just observe the world as something which doesn't change, and let's say the statistical principles on through which the phenomena perform, they are different based on what we do, and the physical reality doesn't behave like that. But that's why we the kind of how we approach and model and analyze the things needs to be really different than what happens through natural sciences and in natural sciences. And that doesn't mean that we can let anything go and so on and so on, but it means actually from the point of view of mathematics and computer science that there's much more work to be done. But then it means that the reductionistic kind of approach that works well in natural sciences, it really is not adequate. So it's if not abundant, so it's just a kind of starting point. And then the feedback, for example, the feedback mechanisms need to be included in the formalization of the system. And I find it interesting that these areas like language, art, economy, social and societal organizations, they are actually such things that they don't exist without us. So they are kind of agreements, but they are not only agreements. We don't really agree about language in the sense that so we kind of imitate, we are constructing and reconstructing language all the time. It has a basic distribution, the kind of the things which are in there, which are shared by the speakers of the same language to a certain degree, but it's kind of evolving and changing all the time, and our interpretations in the changing physical world and so on, but more especially in the cultural world. So it's such a kind of hugely dynamic system that, as said, so the kind of the rules of physics are really kind of just a minor player in that situation. And as said, so again, I would like to stress that it doesn't mean that we could give up mathematics, for example. Of course, mathematics is a great tool and remains to be such, but then it needs to be rethought that what are the assumptions that we kind of apply. So the kind of that things are such that, of course, already something like conditional probability is a great tool in comparison with some, let's say, traditional formal logic. So first order predicate logic is really poor method to understand most of the things in the world, and conditional probability is already much stronger. But I would claim that there is still much more to do. I can't say that I would be able to say that what are all those things, but the kind of the formalization really is something that there is still much to do and what can be done in order to match the what can be called epistemology and then ontology. So this kind of what the really world is, so what is actually there, and in those things which are changed by our decision and our thought. So the atoms don't change, or there might be some phenomena that are there, but that's quite hypothetical. But it's very concrete that our thoughts, if we kind of say that we would say that this is clunk, and now we repeat, everyone would repeat it a couple of times, and then we meet in a week, and what has happened to your clunk? And then the clunk would be in our kind of social reality. And so that's the kind of situation with these phenomena, and how to model it seriously, taking into account that even the formalization could be kind of reconsidered from this point of view. So the kind of conclusion here is that the new paradigm of mathematics and computer science could be developed, and I claim here more strongly is needed in order to kind of deal with phenomena related to humanities and social sciences. And I think it's for formally capable people can make an important contribution to those areas, and not to just to say that they are not scientific because they can't do this and that. Because I think the most important things in our life are actually in those sciences. And then the question is just that they haven't had really kind of strong methodologies for some of the things to be really addressed, because it has been close to impossible, and the kind of the situation is changing heavily when we can take billion data points and 1 million variables or something, and then to really start to kind of tackle with the more complex phenomena than having just some stellar points in the world and so on. So that's the complexity difference is huge, and the nature of the phenomena. And some thoughts which arise when I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago related to Wittgenstein's philosophy, which I, by the way, do how we have some minutes only left. I would like to leave some time for discussion, because this could be also distributed. I can put the slides on the web or something like that.
Yes, sure.
So maybe we do that, because
we can do that.
Yes, because I would like to have some minutes for discussion.
Sure. Yeah, up to you.
Yes, okay, but just to say so that there's an interesting connection between how Wittgenstein's philosophy and AI development has been taking place, and so that early Wittgenstein had some ideas which were hugely formalistic and simplistic, I would say laughable from modern point of view, and then what has happened in AI, in the good old AI and then the modern AI, so there's a similar kind of pattern of development. so that we understand the world and the processes much better nowadays. And like I have been trying to kind of suggest, so there are still many things that can be done. But thank you very much, and I went through quite many things in quite a pace, so such a way that it. I hope that you can find some point of view that for a short discussion.
Thanks a lot. So we have some questions or comments or no. Yeah, yes.
One thing of the day is this Jaakko Junika's thesis in Jyväskylä. He's just defending it, and it's about how child rearing, if you are very oppressive and demanding to children, produces warriors which are very reliable in the warfare. These cultures tend to win because they simply kind of displace others or subjugate. So how do you see this? Is there a chance to change this wave, and is the evil winning in the world?
Yes, that evil is here a very practical thing. So it's a kind of survival of the fittest or something like that. And that's, of course, a really crucial thing. And that's why I have suggested that the results of this peace machine really need to be waiting for 100 years to even get kind of asymptotically kind of close to it. But also game theory is a good framework to consider some of the things. But I would say that what has been happening to us, and there is evidence for certain positive developments, it's a cultural evolution. So it's an evolution of our thoughts and our values. And that's why that capacity exists there, because we need to be concerned about the attack of those who want to conquer us and so on. And in order to kind of get rid of that, so it's obvious that this kind of challenging task, and then the kind of observation of our understanding and our values and so on, is something that when we have an increasingly and more detailed global view on how things are, so that's one potential way of approaching it in a positive way. So that what is the actual level of the kind of how much concern we have to have, and how much are we prepared to test that, and how we build the game when we actually can kind of reduce this kind of preparation to war. And for the moment, for example, I said that it's not sensible to give up the armed forces, because this is exactly the current situation, and it needs to be kind of gradually diminish this kind of problematic situation. But thank you for pointing out that. So even if you, with my memory and anybody's memory, actually, if you can send a message about this thing, so that would be very interesting. And that's one of the examples of the fact that communication and this traditional scientific communication is extremely important. So almost every day, even nowadays, when this thing has become known, so it's interesting that how in the Helsinki city streets, so people come just to hello and say that they have an idea or question or something like that. So it's an interesting social process that I have now encountered through this choice of becoming kind of open with this situation. So that's why kind of, because something like this is, of course, one man doesn't kind of win the war, and the same way one person doesn't kind of create the peace, and then finally, of course, millions and millions of people need to be the active ones. And like even the systems that are being kind of outlined to some extent here, they already, the implementation of those needs a large number of people. But the more I've been kind of also looking at our academic work, so very many things which we already do actually serve the basic concept to at least to some degree. So in that sense, I've become also quite optimistic, because now when I've seen the emergent process of what happened when I just said the two words, there's actually only one. So of course there are many people who think that that's kind of crazy or impossible, but then there's only one person who has really said that it doesn't work, but he's a very old AI critical person who thought that AI is not important or interesting or whatever at all, and he kind of criticizes everyone who says the word artificial intelligence. So I haven't even read his criticism, which I thought that I want to do someday to see if there's some grain of good criticism, but the kind of good points are such that, for example, what you presented. So of course there are many concerns, and I went to the military service, and my father and his brother were in the war and got wounded seriously and so on. So I have already had to have, I have experienced, for example, the emotional process of not being angry or having hatred towards Russians, because that was the situation when I was 20 years old. And so I thought that they are just terrible people and so on. And life experience then luckily kind of changes the situations, both concretely at that level, straight level, and then of course getting a chance to go to a higher level of understanding of seeing the systems and seeing oneself as a part of a system where kind of the things emerge, and then one can actually make decisions against these kind of basic paths. And I think that's one of those strengths that we have. And when they are kind of, when the printing, the fact that we can print the books or articles and so on has already strengthened humankind considerably. There has been a couple of world wars, of course, even after that. But anyway, very many good things have happened, and we are all mostly richer than the king of any country 2,000 years ago, kind of in our chances to do things and so on. So the world has developed greatly, and I think printing kind of has been very important there.
Thanks. I had a question regarding this negotiation of meaning.
Yes.
So if you think, if we would think beyond the meaning of single words and think about the meaning of arguments that people are making in a debate.
Yes.
So, and then with the situation with filter bubbles and such, you have people ending up living in different conceptual realities.
Yes.
Making different assumptions when they try and hopefully try to make a logical argument in a debate. So how would you go about concretely modeling these different sets of assumptions or worldviews?
I would start from Vygotsky's work 100 years ago, because I think he was a brilliant Soviet psychologist, and he already formalized quite nicely the bubble that we are bound to have. So when people say kind of, by trying to kind of say that you are living in your bubble, everyone is living in one's bubble. But of course some bubbles are larger, and as I said about the meta-level skills that we researchers have is already a strong strength that helps, so that if we can see the things kind of wider. But that's, I think it's the his idea or model of seeing things in such a way that our kind of area that he was talking about education, so our knowledge and understanding of the world, so it's not as kind of nice as this one, it's more like a scattered, but anyway, so he presented the idea of a zone of proximal development, so that this is something that we know, that we can and so on understand, and then we have this area, this zone of proximal development that we can reach with the help of others. And now the interesting thing here is that we have first of all, we need to have a good goal directness, so that what are the values, what are the goals that we want to have. And that's of course a war, that's a battle, so that what do we actually rely on, what are our goals, and we have a fight between the goals, and we of course have different countries, and Putin and everyone is kind of thinking that their way of kind of seeing the world and ruling it is the right one, or the one that we want. But anyway, so the claim is here that this area that we master is enlarging, and it happens both at the conceptual and in a way factual level. I find the concept of fact actually to be highly problematic, because it mostly works well in natural sciences, but like how I pointed out, in these kind of human-oriented areas of life, so the fact is very problematic notion, because it's kind of influenced by what we think and what we decide to do and how we decide to think. But anyway, so that's the basic idea, that the enlarging and meeting each other and then having these tools to actually help in that. And then the question is, I would say it's moral, and it's kind of that's why I'm also interested in religions nowadays quite a bit, because how do we actually organize ourselves to make such decisions that are or are not, but anyway relate to the kind of moral considerations.
In practical terms of building a machine, like this machine, how could we try to help build a machine that helps people to enlarge their bubble, so kind of reach some kind of common understanding of certain issues?
One immediate kind of answer to that is that in order to help in reaching others is to lower down our emotional, or let's say conceptual defenses. So the situation when someone says that you are foolish as you use that word in a wrong way, or whatever, you don't understand this area because you are using a wrong methodology or wrong kind of terminology and so on. So that would come immediately. Stop, that's not right, that you are making a kind of wrong thing here. So just as a simple example, because the basic idea is there. Of course, if there's something related to, let's say, computing or modeling or natural language processing and so on, and we take some random person from the street, and then we ask that, what do you think about that, and so on, their ideas and thoughts would most likely to be simplistic to us. But then if we want to build anyway such a kind of community that would do well together, we would need to kind of take a certain position, not to kind of, in quotes, kill them, but the practical, of course, situation is that we need to, of course, deal with the use of time in a sensible way, but not to kind of claim that everyone, or anyone would have the same, not so the same, but the right answer. So that then the question is just that what you know about something, it may be in a way more valuable than what 1,000 people have about that very specific area. But the distribution of their understanding, and especially its kind of application to the reality, is relevant. And the question is then that nowadays we don't really have time to discuss with each individual. I can make a little bit effort to do that because I find it's kind of my purpose now. But anyway, so then the question is that now with these systems, and if we can build the communal trust in a higher level over the decades, so then the kind of we can have a situation when you the relevant question for you among 1,000 or million people actually could address it, and then what you understand about that phenomenon, you could actually communicate that your understanding them to these million people in such a way that it would be kind of close to this zone of proximal development. And then the systems would be able to actually assess that what are those zones and what would be optimal ways to actually increase our understanding and even our emotional kind of stability or something, a positive way of seeing and addressing things.
Yeah, I think that we can take like maybe you had one more question.
Just to finish this, so
Yes.
I was like, my intention is even more practical.
Yes.
So like for us as NLP researchers, where should we start if we want to build a kind piece of the piece machine? So what would be the first best thing of like really concrete thing to do?
So as I said, so I would be very happy to have collaborators who would have kind of good kind of command of statistical and mathematical kind of thinking and computer science, and then kind of in this meaning negotiation is one of those things. But there's, in order to kind of facilitate those processes, the kind of formation of a society, peace machine society, Rauhankone ry, is under progress. I'm kind of aware of the fact that it's hugely kind of challenging thing even to do that, because if one thinks goes through all the kind of domains and disciplines, so it's kind of spreads so much that I'm kind of a little bit need to kind of convince myself that it's possible to succeed there, because it's kind of potentially growing large. But then to take the first step, so there is a little bit of feelings of fear, I have to say, that I have been kind of postponing some things by some weeks now, because just to have the society, there has been a good support in that, so there has been good people to help there, and I had really have a kind of great time. So this has given a chance to discuss with so many people that I feel very kind of grateful and fortunate in this situation. But anyway, so when I kind of learned that one could do seriously things, it's also becomes a bit kind of how to say, frightening. So the emotion of becoming, because I've been, as I can say that as a researcher, I've been eating chocolate all my life. Actually, I had a quite good funding, and other things I've done, they have been serving my own interest of understanding things. Of course, I've tried to do also practical applications and so on, but all the time it has been kind of this, that it's me who is interested in things. And then when I have studied some Shakespeare's sonnets and so done that for some months, okay, that's interesting. I understand that phenomenon, let's move to something else, and so on. So it has been a bit kind of not that responsible, that I would have aimed at really good quality publications that would be carefully kind of building the argument and the final results and so on. So a conference paper that explains the things that I learned would be, and then nobody else learned and has almost there, because it's not written kind of well enough. And now when dealing with a thing which is hugely serious and kind of something that could serve the whole humankind, so then there's a, oh, what am I doing actually here? So that's why. But that's why I feel very fortunate that I have the chance to communicate this. So if I would go to some room to kind of work on this for a year or 5 years, I think I would become crazy.
Yeah, and I think that there will be a lot of opportunities to do this sort of co-design for this peace machine in real conflictive, environments or context, whether they are political or, I mean, we have a lot of different kinds of conflicts and a lot of different kinds of miscommunication, starting from an individual person, him or herself, or going to a team or department or faculty or university, or you just name it. So I mean, there are lots of possible places and contexts to start this research.
Yes.
And a lot of there is this UN organization, also this UNITAR, which is actually applying like highly sophisticated technologies for understanding the reasons for conflicts by analyzing the satellite images and to see like what was the dynamics and who were the first one to cause different things and so but also like if you think of Truth Commission in South Africa, so that might be
Yes.
like another and Desmond Tutu who chaired that is working with elders. That Martti Ahtisaari also belongs to,
Yes.
and the Institute of International Education in New York, which is actually funding the Scholar Rescue Fund and other things to save refugee scientists. There are lots of these organizations. I think that we can work with.
Great, yes.
And then, of course, there is, as you said, that there is the language level, but then there is, I mean, like how you express yourself. You can express yourself by text, but there are so many other ways to express. Maybe if you can't even use text at all, but you still can communicate, and how we can sense all these emotions.
Exactly.
So lots of opportunities. So, but once again, I'm very, very thankful for
yes.
coming here.
Yes.
And now there are a lot of people who might want to continue with you. I'm going anyway to take you down to the lunch, if that's okay with you.
I think eating is
others can follow if they feel hungry or even if they just want to talk to you. I have a meeting that usually I hate, but I need to do one from 2 to 4. So then, if you can maybe, if someone wants to meet during 2 and 4. And then I was thinking that I could take you to Helsinki by my car. Because
okay.
So then at about 4.
Okay, that would be nice.
Then we can leave and then we can talk about these issues.
Yes. Okay, that's just perfect. Yes.
Good. Thank you once again very much. And also I think that, yes.
Do you speak Finnish?
I have the book already.
Pardon?
I have the book already.
You have the book already. Because I thought, do you have the book?
No.
You don't have. We are the oldest friends in this because we have been working together years 2000 to 2002.
Timo was my CEO, very mad but very creative, very good. So, professors, if you can consider this, go mad. It's useful.
Yes. Okay.
The creativity, the source of creativity.
Yes, that's
Exactly. Yes.
But it's like in Finnish, this is the saying that the movements anyway discuss with each other in the head.